Good evening and welcome to the first ever and quite possibly the last ever Demolition News book review. Now, I have to be honest, I've never done a book review before, live or otherwise, so I'm going to take very much my own approach tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about the first two books, and I'm also going to back that up with some interview clips from both the authors in question. And then I'm going to get on to talking about my own books. I won't review those, obviously, because I wrote them and I would be a bit biased. Instead, I will tell you the stories behind the stories. Now, just so you're aware, there is a chance for you to win one of several books that are up for grabs tonight. Those include a copy of Dangerous Structure by Paul Ford, which I've got about my person here. That's what that one looks like. I'll be coming on to that one in just a second. But we've also got 3 copies of The Japanese Way, which I wrote a few years ago on after a fact-finding mission over to Japan. I've got a copy of my brand new book, A Sight for Sore Eyes. More of that a bit later. And we've also got a copy of My Dad Does Demolition. To win any of those books, all you need to do is write in the chat, basically. So to win Paul Ford's book, Dangerous Structure, just type the word Ford into the chat, F-O-R-D. If you'd like to win a copy of My Dad Does Demolition, type KIDS, K-I-D-S. If you'd like to win the Japanese book, type Japan, no great surprise. And if you want a copy of my brand new book, A Sight for Sore Eyes, type SORE into the chat. If you have a look down at the bottom of the screen there, you will see I've got all of that, all the details of that in the ticker that's going across. I'll keep that on the screen for the remainder of the show. Excuse me one second. I'll keep that running throughout the show, so anybody that joins us a bit later on will be able to get onto the giveaway as well. Just so you know, you can enter as many times as you like. You can also enter for 1, 2, 3, or all 4 books. Our randomizer will sort all of that out at the end of the show. Oh, and by the way, if you're not lucky enough to win a book, or if you'd like to buy any of the books mentioned, you will find links to all of them in the show notes for this show. So with all that being said, let's start with our first book, which is, as I've already said, Dangerous Structure by Paul Ford. I'm starting with this one primarily because it's the one I've read most recently, but also because the proceeds from this book are going to charity, which is an important consideration, I think. For those that don't know, Paul Ford was actually the first civilian to set foot inside the Grenfell Tower after the fire that claimed the lives of 72 people. Paul has got an absolute wealth of experience in making safe and demolishing dangerous structures. And he retains his connections with Grenfell Tower to this very day. In fact, around the Grenfell charities would actually receive around 70% of the proceeds from this book. The remainder, just so you know, are going to the Mates in Mind mental health charity. So before you hear what I've got to say about the book, I'm going to take that out of the way for just a second. Before you hear what I've got to say about the book, I had a chat with Paul Ford a few weeks ago on the day that the book came out, and this is just a snippet of that interview. What actually made you write the book in the first place?
Well, I suppose granted a bit of time in the first instance, to sort of reflect on things during COVID, and there was all kinds of other distractions going on. But we haven't been able to get Grenfell out of our minds at all since the tragedy happened. And I suppose having had the responsibility of dangerous structures since 2005, there's been literally hundreds. I mean, literally hundreds of dangerous structures that I've responded to, and so it becomes part of your career. And I've been doing this now since the late 80s, and there's lots to share. And I really truly believe in the importance of sharing, experience, recommendations, skills that others might just find intriguing, might actually benefit from. It could help save some people, and you just never know. So I found myself with some time to do it, and I sat down and started to research what might already be out there. And looking through BS 6187, there was nothing in there that was specifically aligned to dangerous structures. I was also conscious of, having been out and done hundreds of incidents, you meet all manner of people on the local authority side, district surveyors as they're referred to in London, but building control officers around the country. And some of those poor people end up putting their hand up for doing the sort of the out of hours shift, and something tragic happens, like a big fire or an explosion or a collapse or whatever, and they find themselves out in the field with a responsibility that they've never held before. And it occurred to me that we need to get some consistency. It didn't occur to me. It's absolutely obvious. We need to get some consistency.
Let me start by saying this by way of a review. If you're planning to buy just one book as a result of this show, buy this one. I'd like nothing more than a pre-Christmas influx of book sale cash myself, but this book is far more important and far more educational than anything I've written and anything else I'm going to be talking about later in the show. To put it in very simple terms, there should be a copy of this book in the office of every demolition company, and probably another in the home or car or both of every demolition engineer here in the UK and quite possibly overseas as well. The book itself really is an intriguing mix. There's a huge amount in it that you can learn, but there's also some very moving and some very funny anecdotes that those that work in the demolition industry will truly appreciate. It really does show that Paul is of the industry, some of the things that he's remembered. Now, you can buy this book on Amazon. You absolutely can. But if you do, then Jeff Bezos gets some of the money. And I think Paul Ford figures he's probably got enough of that already, given the fact that he spends half his time flying into space at enormous expense. I think Jeff Bezos has probably got enough money. So to ensure that the money goes to those that actually need it, go to dangerousstructure.com and place your order there instead. Just so you know, the copy of the book that we have in our free giveaway, I actually purchased using that very link. I love a freebie as much as the next guy, but not when there's a charity involved. I really will urge you once again to go and buy a copy of Dangerous Structure Emergency Response. It really is a very insightful but a really enjoyable book as well. I've read it twice now. I wish I had my copy closer to hand because it's absolutely full of index tabs so that I can refer back to it in the future. So yeah, you can certainly go and find that over, as I say, dangerous-structure.com. If you'd like to be in with a chance to win that book, and I've got I've got a hardback copy of it actually, then be sure to type the word Ford into the chat, F-O-R-D. You can still see the entry details are running across the foot of the screen. Now, I need to do a bit of jiggery pokery here. Bear with me for 2 ticks. Get rid of that. And I'm going to share a different screen because it lives somewhere else. It's that one there. Now, hopefully we should be looking at that. Yes, we are. There we go. So the next book on the list for tonight is Dr. Demolition by, no great surprise, Dr. Terry Cornby himself. As most of you will know, Terry is a former president of the Institute of Demolition Engineers. I think he is certainly most certainly widely respected for both for his experience, but also for his academic achievements and qualifications as well. He really has managed to combine the worlds of demolition and academia as well. So before I get into the book, here's me and Terry talking about the book when it came out earlier this year. I'm back, but not entirely sure why. But this is back when I had maybe a little bit less beard. One of the things that really makes the book stand out for me is that the apparent contradiction that sort of seems to lie at the very heart of the book, in the fact that you spent almost your entire life railing against authority and the establishment, and that yet you ended up as the head of a recognized institute, promoting professional development and encouraging people to pursue academic pursuits. The two things don't seem to go together, do they?
I don't know. It's quite a difficult question to answer, really, but I think you could probably sum it up by saying you can call it growing up, actually. I think if you start, if you're somebody like myself who started from humble beginnings in a place where people didn't have that much to look forward to, or certainly didn't have a lot of money to do anything with, you either tend to go along with the flow and become one of the herd, or you try to stand out and try to be somebody different than what you may end up being, as everybody else is. I think the one thing in my favour from a very early age, and whether that was because of my lack of family upbringing, if you like, or the lack of discipline I had from a fatherly figure, was the fact that I had a large work ethic. I didn't mind hard work, and I listened, I watched my peers to see what they did and how they did it, and I tried to emulate them. And over the years, that's the sort of ethos I've had in not being afraid to tackle anything, not being afraid of the mistakes I've made, actually, and I've made quite a lot of mistakes, as you can read in the book. But I think I've learned from them, and I've tried not to repeat them. I hope I haven't repeated them in later years.
So let me state for the record, I actually wrote the foreword for this book, so I may be just a little bit biased. Rather than actually reviewing the book, here is a very small part of the foreword that I wrote immediately after reading his book for the first time. Terry Quarmby is not defined by his chosen profession. Rather, there are parts of his profession that have been shaped by his very presence and influence. Let me just kill something. Bear with me 1 second. Right, okay. His is a story filled with plot twists, diversions, and unforeseen adventures. His is a restless spirit that is perfectly suited to his nomadic lifestyle of the jobbing demolition man. There are countless brushes with authority, ironic given his ultimate position as a respected head of an entire industry. That contradiction in that book is not unique in any way. There are rollicking tales that variously combine the Navy, rugby, fights, and more than a few pints in countless bars and pubs in the UK and far beyond. So while there's a lot of demolition in the book, it is about far more, or it's far more actually about the events that shaped the man that has helped to shape the industry. You can buy Demolition, Dr. Demolition rather, using the link in the show notes. But as I said, you can also enter for your chance to win other free books, not that one, but other free books. You can see that below. Where are we? Now, you might have to bear with me here. Before I get into the next book, which is one of my own, I'm about to attempt something that we've never done before, and I can already tell, looking out the corner of my eye, that it hasn't gone exactly to plan. We are going to switch to an overhead camera for a grand unboxing. And while I'm firing that up, a very quick explanation. Literally about an hour ago, or an hour before we came on air, Amazon delivered the first of our new book. The first batch of our new book, and that first batch is actually for our patrons over on our members only platform, which, if you're interested, is patreon.com/demolition news. They've only come to me so that I can sign them and then send them on to our patrons. So as a result of that, I haven't actually seen them yet. So let's see if we can fire up the overhead camera. I'm going to try and make that full screen. The camera is the wrong way around, as you could probably tell, but never mind. Let's get the book or the book box open. Eagle-eyed among you might spot the fact that I'm actually using a JCB Leatherman knife. Never leaves my side. Let's have a look, see if we can get in this damn thing. Probably should have opened these in advance, but it takes away the drama, doesn't it? Right, so the box is open. I'm going to switch back to the other camera. Let's remove that. There we are. And this, I'm seeing this at the same time as you. That is what the new book looks like. I'm going to remove something else in the background that you don't need to know about. Okay, so that's gone away. That's what the new book looks like. I might be unique in this, but I do love the smell of new books. I also like the smell of old books, actually. That's a whole other story. So that's a new book. It is called A Sight for Sore Eyes, Volume 2. I'm going to tell you about that in just a second. I'm going to take you through exactly what brought that book into being in just a second. So just while I'm getting myself straight and clearing my desk a bit, let's roll this. Now, before I start, I will remind you, you can actually win a copy of that book. Just type the word SORE, S-O-R-E, into the chat, and we'll be doing a draw at the end of the show. So this is A Sight for Sore Eyes, Volume 2. Now, the original copy, or the original Sight for Sore Eyes, was actually published back in 2016. In the immediate aftermath of the Didcot disaster. And like an awful lot of what I do, it really came about through the marrying of two seemingly unconnected ideas. So I'd been reading a couple of books by an author called Henry Rollins, who used to be the lead singer, the front man with a punk band back in the day called Black Flag. Well, Henry Rollins has taken on a more respectable role in recent years, and he's become a self-published author. And one of the things that Henry Rollins has done, and I've read quite a few of these, is he works for a year, 18 months, and then he pulls together the very best of his work and produces an anthology. Now, I saw that and I thought, well, that seems like a remarkably good idea, bearing in mind the fact that I do an awful lot of writing. And I'm just going to stop to acknowledge this one very quickly. Just finished my copy of Dangerous Structures. Fantastic read. The fact that he's donating all money to charity, credit to him. Top bloke. I totally agree. I don't know if Paul is around tonight, but if he is, I will certainly pass on that message. So getting back to my story, Henry Rollins. So Henry Rollins anthology, and I thought to myself, one of these days I will sit down and I will pull together all of my very best work and I'll turn it into a book. And like so many of the things that I do, that was an idea that was parked in the dark recesses of my brain, and I did nothing with it. And then on the 23rd of February 2016, the Didcot disaster happened. 4 demolition workers were tragically killed in that event, in that incident. And that brought that whole idea of a published book back into the very forefront of my mind. So I phoned a few people and said, I'm planning to do this. I'm going to give the profits from the book to the families of the guys that were involved. In actual fact, just to be clear, one of the families didn't actually want anything to do with it. So the money that we raised went to 3 of the 4 families. Cut a long story short, the book, we printed an initial 1,000. This is before we were on Amazon. So I had to take a bit of a flyer and hope we could sell them. So we got 1,000 printed. We sold all of those. We got another 1,000 printed and we sold all of those as well. And then we had another 1,000 printed. And I think I've probably got a couple of copies lurking in a lockup or a garage somewhere now. Probably a little bit moth-eaten these days. But the books proved so successful and so popular that I promised myself that I would do one every year. And here we are, nearly 6 years later, and I finally got around to doing volume 2. Now, I have actually put in my Google Calendar a note for about this time next year to do volume 3. And one of the reasons I'm mentioning that is the fact that, you can all hold me to account. So, if by December next year you haven't had notification of a new copy of A Sight for Sore Eyes, Volume 3, then please feel free to swear and shout and throw things at me because I need to pull my finger out. I certainly write enough to generate another one of those. I will just very quickly remind you, if you'd like to be in a chance of winning a free copy of that brand new book, then just type the word SORE, S-O-R-E, into the chat. And now we're going to move on to yet another book. So next on the list is a book called The Japanese Way. That's what she looks like. So back in 2019, I was lucky enough to visit Japan as part of a European Demolition Association study tour to look at how demolition in Japan differs from the way demolition is done here in the UK and in Europe as well. And I have to say, I was inspired. I went as a journalist. I didn't go as an author. I went as a journalist. So my original idea was to produce, we tend to talk in thousands of words in the field of journalism. So my original idea was to produce 1,000, maybe 1,500 words to talk about the things I'd seen. But that wasn't enough. It really wasn't enough. And when I started writing and listening back to some of my audio notes, looking through my written notes, it very, very quickly became clear that there was a book there just waiting to be done. So I wrote it. Cut a long story short, that really was as simple as that. I've not looked at this for a while, but basically, I've split it down into chapters, and a lot of it talks about, as I say, the difference between the way that the Japanese approach demolition to the way that we do it here. For example, we went to a couple of demolition sites while I was there, and a lot of them have got they've laid down sheets of steel for the machines to track over, partly to protect the ground, but also to keep the tracks clean and everything else. And it was such a simple thing, and yet it was commonplace. When you see their attachments, a lot of their attachments have got incorporated magnets, whereas we tend to have a grab or a shear or whatever it might be, and then drop that off and pick up a magnet. A lot of those are basically 2-in-1. So you've got a pulverizer of some description plus a magnet. So you're actually breaking concrete and you're segregating the steel at the same time. So there's that. One of the real standout points was the fact that the attachments that they use there are absolutely massive. And they're massive for a very, very simple reason. Obviously, Japan is often hit by earthquakes. As a result, Japanese buildings are built with absolutely enormous and heavily reinforced foundations. Those foundations, therefore, require exceptionally large attachments. So I came back very, very inspired by that, to the point where, well, this is after I came back. This was actually while I was there. I originally flew to Kobe, and we then travelled on down to Tokyo, and all of that's in the book. I won't bore you with that right here or right now. But when I arrived in Kobe, slightly jet lagged and a little bit bewildered, I took myself up a mountain. Funny story. I'd seen the mountain and I'd seen a cable car. Went down to reception at the hotel and said, "How do I get to the cable car?" And the guy said, "You go through that door over there." And it literally was built off the side of the hotel. So took the cable car up to the top of the mountain. And just as a slight diversion here, I was recounting this story to somebody a couple of days ago, actually. There was a very small, there was maybe 100 people in front of me in the queue to get in the cable car. I stand 5'10" in heels, and I was the tallest person in that queue by some considerable margin, probably by 4 or 5 inches. But I digress. But took myself up this mountain, and I took the cable car up and I walked back down, partly so I could look at the waterfalls and the herb gardens and all that kind of thing, which is not normally my cup of tea, but it really was absolutely fascinating. But because I had my iPhone with me and I had a microphone with me, I was actually recording basically a live podcast while I was doing it. So there's lots of me talking about, the sights and smells, the herb garden. I spotted hanging from a tree a caterpillar in a cocoon, and spotted and thought, oh, that's interesting. And I mentioned that in the microphone. And then when I looked further beyond, sort of going down the mountain, there were thousands of them, and there were butterflies. I mean, literally that size, absolutely enormous. And then I did what I'd like to think is a first. It probably isn't, but I'd like to think it was a first. I actually recorded part of that podcast on the bullet train. We were doing whatever it is, 300 odd mile an hour, going from Kobe down to Tokyo, and I was recording a podcast live as we shot past Mount Fuji. All of that it's not a book, although some of it is in the book, but that podcast is actually available on our Anchor platform. If you have a look in the show notes for tonight's show, you can give that a listen. That book is called The Japanese Way. There's a copy here sat on my desk waiting to be given away to the person that comes out of the drawer, having typed the word Japan into the chat. So type the word Japan and you could be in with a chance of winning that book. Now, have I missed a book? No, I just think my notes are slightly out of order. So next up is, what should we do next? I'm going to do Demolition 2051 next. So that there is Demolition 2051. And the story behind that one is remarkably straightforward. Balfour Beatty had issued a white paper, basically, that forecast how they envisaged the construction industry of the UK might look at the time. I think theirs was set 50 years in the future. And once again, it was something that I parked in the dark recesses of my brain and thought, I'll do something with that. And I while I was going about and traveling on trains and planes and that kind of thing, I was making notes about what I believe demolition might look like in my case. I think I said it like 33 years in the future, because I quite like the name 2051. So that was basically the idea. Two things that really stand out for me. The book is a work of fiction, but I based it largely in fact or expected fact. So there is talking there about sort of drone surveys and autonomous machines and that kind of thing. But one of the things that really surprised me about that book is it was written 2 years ago now, I think, and the world has actually started to catch up with the book. There's a lot in there that I thought was very, very advanced and very forward thinking, and was probably a long way off, and yet it's now happening. And although I do mention in the book the use of electric machines, I certainly didn't see the sudden disappearance of diesel that we seem to be heading towards. I made no mention whatsoever of hydrogen machines. I think I did mention biofuels because that was a fairly hot topic when I wrote it. But yeah, so as I say, the book, it is a work of fiction, and I won't get into the details. You need to read the book to really get it. But the way that the book came together, I wanted to make it a human story. And there's, as anyone that works in and around demolition in the UK knows, there's an awful lot of family firms. So grandfather hands it to son, who hands it to son, who hands it to son, and that sort of thing. And I really wanted to portray that in the book. So the core of the book, that doesn't get caught up in the technicalities, is literally a guy who basically still hankers after the demolition of old with diesel-powered machines that his dad used to use, even though he's got access to all this technology. So that's that book, Demolition 2051. You can find a link to that on in the show notes for today. It's on sale for I can't even remember the price, but it's on sale over on Amazon.com or Amazon.co.uk, whichever suits you the best. Now, I should have had a link here to the next book, but I haven't, so I'm just going to have to fudge it. The next book, I can't even show you one, because this is the one. Funnily enough, I actually gave my copy of this one away a few days ago, so I'll have to explain this one. So, quick reminder, don't forget to type those words, SAW, Kids, Ford and Japan into the chat to be in with a chance of winning. So the next book up is called Renaissance, Why JCB is the Apple of the Digger World. The story behind it, slightly drawn out, but bear with me. I was one of the first journalists to see JCB's Hydra-Dig machine when it first launched. And while I was listening to the company's head of all things innovation, Tim Burnhope, talking about the features and the benefits of the new Hydra-Dig, I scribbled in my notebook, and I really wish I could find this, but I scribbled in my notebook the word Apple. It struck me that Apple didn't invent the smartphone or the tablet computer or wireless headphones or smart watches, but what they did was make them desirable. They made them sexy, basically. And I was really struck, having seen the Hydra-Dig, that JCB had done exactly the same thing. They'd taken the basic notion of a wheeled excavator, which, let's face it, is not the most exciting machine, but they turned it into a properly aspirational product. So I wrote the word Apple in my notebook and thought I might do something with that. Never did. Fast forward almost exactly a year, And I was invited back to JCB World Headquarters up in Staffordshire to see the unveiling of the company's innovative high-vis dumper. And once again, I was struck by how JCB had managed to take a familiar and well-established product and turn it on its head, to the point where, having seen the grand unveiling, I found myself literally stood beside Tim Burnhope, and he said, "What do you think?" And my exact answer was, "You've done it again." This is where things get slightly weird. So I went away and I wrote the book without actually telling JCB I was going to do it. Shared that information with my son, who produced an image of a JCB wheel loader taking, that familiar bite out of the Apple logo, the missing. I could probably show you if we'd find my phone, but my phone is my overhead camera, so I can't do that. But that familiar missing part of the Apple. So it looked like the JCB wheel loader had taken a bite out of the Apple logo. That was the basic thing. And the actual fact, as it stands now, that image is actually on the book of the book. That is on the rear of the book that we're talking about. I got that far, but I still had a few questions and a few final gaps that needed filling in. So I called the good folks at JCB, and they invited me back up to the JCB World Headquarters. Now, I'm going to take a slight diversion very, very quickly. On the way there, I was involved in a car crash. Move on. So got there with a car that was ultimately written off, actually. That's just as an aside. But I got to sit down with Tim Burnhope in the Innovation Centre. And he set about explaining how the company literally went about reimagining familiar and existing products, and how JCB was inspired by Apple and its design ethos. Now, bearing in mind, JCB didn't know the name of my book or the subject matter either. I quickly pulled out my mobile phone, and yes, it is an iPhone, no great surprise. And I showed Tim Burnhope the image of the JCB machine taking a bite out of the Apple logo. And a few weeks later, that book dropped. The irony of all of that, and in actual fact, that's proved... I'll come on to bestsellers and stuff in just a second, but book sales tend to go up and down, seasonally or whatever it might be. That one has been the most consistent of all the books we've done. It's not our biggest seller, but it's been our most consistent. It's maintained a bit of a plateau. But the irony of it all is, while that book takes in several JCB machines, notably the Hydra Dig and the high-vis dumper, I could probably go back now and add some more chapters to it, because JCB has followed up with yet more innovations since, not least of which would be their switch, their much publicized eventual switch to hydrogen, which is coming down the pipe. So maybe I need to make a note for myself to revisit the subject, and maybe go back and amend that book once the hydrogen machines arrive. I'm going to roll this because we are getting very close to the end. So this is actually your last call to enter the prize draw to win one of the 4 books we have up for grabs. Just follow the instructions that are in the ticker that is still scrolling across the bottom of the screen. You can enter as many times as you like, but time is running out because we are now at the final book, which bizarrely is actually the first one that I wrote. I say I wrote it. I wrote this and another one called My Dad Drives a Digger, which unfortunately is out of print. But I wrote that, My Dad Does Demolition, with my good friend John Woodward, the former president of the Institute of Demolition Engineers. There's not a huge amount I can tell you about this one because it's aimed at children between the ages of 4 and 8. But I can tell you that the basic premise behind the book was basically to help children understand what went on behind demolition site holdings, and also to deliver a bit of a recycling message while we were about it. The whole idea, obviously, John Woodward, while he was with the IDE, much the same as Terry Quarmby, was very, very focused on education and training and getting people into the industry. And between us, we just decided that the way to start to do that, to start to sow the seeds, was to go down to primary school level and start to get children interested, because we don't have the luxury of we don't allow people to get, or children to go to work with their fathers and mothers on site these days. Health and safety have put the kibosh on that, so we can't do that anymore. So we considered that the book was the next best thing. So that was basically the premise behind it. That has now proved to be, by some considerable margin, our best-selling book. We've literally, and I do mean literally, we have sold boxes of those books primarily to demolition contractors who find themselves working close to the school, and they use that book as part of their community liaison program. So they're either going to the school themselves and doing a talk on what demolition's all about, and all the children get a copy of that book. And they're also doing it where they shut the site for an afternoon or something, and they get the children along with their teachers and show them around the site. So that basically is the idea. Now, I'm going to do the draw in just a second, because I need to fire that up in just a second. But I will just draw your attention to a story from way back when. So when I wrote that one, I was invited to a school, not a million miles, probably 20 miles up the road. A school invited me to go along and to speak to some of their children. So I think I did 4 different classes of varying age groups. Very, very engaged, really smashing bunch of kids. And I was actually there on the day that they were celebrating the start of or the very end of their term. So they were going into Easter. So there was a fair outside, and they were buying Easter eggs, and some of them were in costume and all the good stuff. So I sat down with a class full of 8-year-old children, told them about My Dad Does Demolition, told them about My Dad Drives a Digger, and one of the children said, "Are you writing any other books?" And I said, "Well, actually, yes, I am. In fact, I've just finished one, and it's called A Sight for Sore Eyes, Volume 1. Didn't know it was going to be Volume 1 at the time, but it was Volume 1. And I explained the thinking behind it, why I'd written it, why I was sending the profits to the families of the guys that were killed in the Didcot disaster. At the end of the lesson, the children told the children to give me a round of applause, not necessary, told them to line up in an orderly fashion and make their way out of the class. And there was one little boy, little ginger boy, who held back and was kind of half looking at me and half looking at his feet. So I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, and he literally walked over and he said, "My mum gave me a £1 coin to go and spend at the fair to get an Easter egg or something like that. But can you give it to the families of the guys that were killed?" Yeah, that left an impression. Needless to say, I didn't take his £1 coin. I sent him on his way and wished him well with his Easter egg. But yeah, that was quite a tough afternoon, that one. Did I shed a tear? Couldn't possibly say. The glasses would have hidden it anyway. That pretty much wraps up the show tonight. I hope you've enjoyed our wander through the pages of those books. If you weren't lucky enough to win a book, like if you weren't Justin Carrigan or Gary Muirhead, then take a look at the links in the show notes. You can buy one or more for yourself or a friend or a colleague. Just a very, very quick word of advice. We are just a day or two, well, what are we? About a week or so away from Black Friday. So if you would like to buy any of my books, wait till Black Friday and you can get yourself a bargain. I can't say the same for Paul Ford's book, because you're buying that direct, and rightly so, because we don't want Amazon getting any more money. And not sure what will happen with Terry Cornby's. It may go down in price. I really don't know. But if you want to hang on till Black Friday or Cyber Monday and check back those links, feel free to do so. That just about wraps it up. I'm going to be back here again 10 a.m. in the morning, as I always am. I can't give away too much about what's going to be on the show tomorrow. What I can tell you, though, is that we will be playing the Squid Game with Hyundai. But until then, have a great evening. Congratulations to all our winners. Thank you to Terry Cornby and to Paul Ford for allowing me to review their books. Go buy a book. Buy a book for a friend, buy a book for a colleague, buy a book for a partner, or whatever it might be. Just buy a book. And I will leave you with this. I'll tone it down. I will leave you with this quote from the film director, John Waters. And John Waters once said, if you pick somebody up in a bar or a nightclub and you go back to their place and they don't have any books, don't shag them. With that, good evening. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow morning. All the best.